So speaking of violence and the kind of violence America inflicts, I mean, the other issue, of course, is the other sort of issue hanging in the backdrop of everything at the moment, on top of the gun violence, is the issue of the war in Ukraine, and it's all we hear about. Like, we're just surrounded by it in the media, on social media, on mainstream media, nonstop, endless coverage of Ukraine. We have to arm Ukraine. We have to give Ukraine more weapons. Anybody who doesn't agree is a Russian stooge. And I'm curious, you're actually on the ground campaigning, talking to normal people. Is this issue even coming up? And if so, how are you as a Green Party candidate dealing with it? Because of course, much like the propaganda about third parties is concerned, there's also this third parties are just Russian agents in America kind of propaganda. So there's like, it kind of ties into the whole Ukraine narrative and Russia's the enemy. So I'm curious about how you're dealing with with sort of like that group of issues.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, Rania, because people, we didn't find many people at all asking us about Ukraine, talking about Ukraine. If it was in the context of the fact that it's costing them $4.50 to put gas in their car now. They're making that connection, the inflation, but very rarely, I mean, almost never did someone talk about Ukraine. People talked about the things that were important to them. I mean, again, it was in the order of what we heard from people. It was about the enthusiasm for something different, for political change, for fixing the system, however you want to describe it. And then it was cost of living. And then the war on drugs, because we were really pushing the war on drugs messaging. And we had a lot of people who were very receptive to that, not because they want marijuana to be legalized so they can get high in a park or something like that, but because they've seen the very real effects of the war on drugs on their families, on their friends and their communities, whether it be because of the overdose deaths, over 100,000 each year now, or it's the lasting effects of that criminal system. These people who 10, 15, 20 years after getting some nonviolent drug charge are still dealing with it. I mean, I have family in my neighborhood, the drug charge was years ago. Cops, the parole officers still show up. And the guy, my neighbor's got to deal with that in front of his kids, as well as it's always there, and so those are the things we heard about. That's what we heard about. The war in Ukraine, now very, very seldom, because it's not affecting people. And I think people rightfully see it as something that doesn't involve, how do I put this? I think people rightly see it as this is an issue between two megalomaniac structures in DC and in Moscow, that this is a dirty war, a war about fossil fuels and, larger issues of commerce. But this is an insane war, a war that didn't need to take place, that I think many people rightfully don't divorce this war in Ukraine from the wars of the last couple decades. I mean, I think most people look at it and say, well, it's the same. It's our same Pentagon we have. It's the same people in Congress. It's more or less the same people in the White House. I mean, so how is this war different from all the other wars? And, it certainly is, there are aspects of it that are different. But this is something I found when I first started speaking out against the wars. People would ask me, well, what's the differences between Iraq and Afghanistan, and, compare and contrast. And I'd fall into that trap. And eventually I realized there is no difference. As long as the United States military is occupying these countries, there is no difference in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Everything else is you're missing the forest because of the trees here. And the same in this war in Ukraine. If you want to take and maybe this is what is so maddening, because as you say, if you speak against the official narrative, you somehow try and bring a context or nuance into it, you're a Putin apologist. So if you don't take the line that the war starts, history starts in February of this year, nothing that occurred before matters. 15,000 dead people in eastern Ukraine from fighting over 8 years, that somehow is separate. We don't need to talk about that to understand what's happening in Ukraine now. That's just complete madness. But that's the way our political media, military industrial complex narrative shapes it. And so, understanding, I think, which most people do, that this is the culmination of decades of militarism, and they don't want any part of it. They don't see any need for it. Not to say their hearts aren't going out for the Ukrainians, not to say that they don't want peace there, but not to say that they support what Russia's doing. None of that's true. I think you could say all this and still condemn Russia. I mean, that's what I do. I mean, they launched a war of aggression, of invasion and occupation. That doesn't diminish, though, the decades of pushing between the U.S. and Russia that went on that has led to this proxy war. I mean, so I think, again, people understand that this war is the consequence of decades of militarist policies of the United States. I don't know if they'll use that term or not, but they see that this is where you keep pushing somebody, they're going to push back. And we keep going around the world, putting our noses in places where it probably doesn't belong, instigating things. And they see, again, that it's the same people over and over and over again who are leading these wars, prosecuting these wars, speaking about these wars. I was just listening to Secretary of State Tony Blinken speak yesterday about the war in Ukraine. First of all, he talks about it as if the United States is some type of just, interested bystander. He says, right. He says, we're not sure how this is going to play out. As if like, I don't know how this game's going to end. I don't know if they're going to pull the pitcher in the 7th inning or not. I mean, like as if they have no say in this war as they're sending, right, billions of dollars of weapons, as we basically were paying the salaries for the Ukrainian army now. I mean, it's our war. If you're paying the salaries of an army at war, guess what? That's your army and it's your war. No matter how you want to, the semantics you want to use, that's the reality of it. So, I mean, but I was reminded because I met with Blinken when I resigned in protest over the Afghan war. It's the same people. All those people who were in the room are in the room now making the decisions about the war in Ukraine. And, so people understand that and they get that. And they're seeing the effects in terms of the inflation that's been caused by it. The seeming priority on sending weapons to kill when we can't even get things here at home that we need. There's no ability to look at COVID. I mean, we're seeing COVID cases spike here in North Carolina, and money's running out. Money's running out. They can't even approve money to pay for tests and taking care of people and vaccines, et cetera. But money goes right away to Ukraine.